Alright, I'm going to try to use a lattice to open and close these rose petals. This is still building on the Valentine's rose, so this is a lattice box. That's the rose I'm trying to deform, petals only. So, I think with the rose selected, go to modifiers and lattice. Object, lattice. That's this thing out here. So, I should be able to, what I'm trying to do is I will scale these points, these 4 points at the edges of that lattice. That's this black box here. It's wireframe. We're going to try it. We'll go into edit mode and select all 4 of them points. The top. We'll scale it. Okay, that's doing a little bit of closing, not a whole lot. Let's see. We'll try grab and then press Z. G and Z. See, that don't do it either. Alright, well, let's see here. Go try another trick. Try subdividing. Yeah, could just push A for everything and W. It won't let me subdivide, will it? Usually in edit mode it'll let you subdivide planes and stuff, cubes, but this it won't. Alright, well, let's work on the base. We'll select the scale. Also notice it's doing something to the stem. I thought it was only supposed to modify what's inside the box. Oh, interesting. Hold on. Now it does flip that stem around, though. I don't like that necessarily, but look at that possibility. Does make it look funky there. I'm not a big fan of what it's doing to the stem, though. I was trying. The overall goal was just to get just the rose part mainly at the top here. Let's see. Could get back out in the object mode. If I get rid of this lattice, I guess we'll try again. Add lattice. This time, instead of putting the base near the bottom of this rose like I had it before, let's put the top of that lattice close to the area I'm trying to affect. And let's see here. Let's scale this so we can get as much of this top part. I'm trying to really close up the top part of that rose. I need to put my rose inside that lattice, though. So it just added. So let's. It's a little bit better. All right. I suppose scale. Take a little bit of tinkering here. It looks a little bit better. Well, we'll try it and see. Alright, with the object selected, I'll get rid of the old modifier. Put a new lattice. This is the strength of it, like how much influence whatever I do to the lattice has on the object, and edit mode. Box select. Just want to work with these four. Scale. To my amazement, it doesn't. Aha. You have to kind of go like an hourglass pattern there. Interesting. Didn't work like that. Okay. Well, now, so how do I use this? How do I animate this? How do I, because I got this timeline here. Go to object mode and we can turn it back to its original state, but if we wanted to go beyond that, like we were before, now I can keyframe that. The strength I can keyframe. I'll give you an example. So this is how we'd make an animation. See, I'm wanting it to start closed. First we'll go into our camera. Like I normally do, push in, or that little, go back here. It's a little arrow, very small, or you can just press in. They call this the in panel. Go to view and lock camera to view. It's just something you always have to do. So that when I zoom in, we're always looking at what the camera is going to see if I render it. I have to watch another video on how to animate that lattice. I think there is a way, I just don't know it just yet. But I'm going to show or talk about what I do know, and that's how to animate this strength. That's the easy peasy right here. So anyway, click this little dot. It's going to put a little diamond there, meaning it's made a keyframe. Frame number 1. I'll go jump over to frame 100. And we'll slide this strength all the way down to 0. Make another keyframe. And so now I have 2 keyframe points. So this is like 100% strength and then 0%. This number right here. So I go back, push rewind, frame 1, push play, and there you go. So the lattice, what it does, it deforms the mesh, which is what the rose is made of. Go into wireframe and you can see it a little bit better. And this is called a mesh. Anything in 3D is usually called a mesh. So anyway, I go back to frame 1. And by the way, so in other words, this is what we started with. This is what the rose looked like originally. And what I was wanting to do was wondering, can we close the rose petals up in an easy way possible without having to edit the mesh and all kinds of. This is an easier way of doing it using the lattice. So that's what this is doing. So now we go back to shaded view. Push play, and we can just watch this. course, my frame ends at 250 and it just keeps playing it over and over again. Of course, we ain't got no special shaders. You can go as crazy as you want with these. You can turn on screen space reflections, refraction, bloom. I use bloom a lot. Pause it here for a moment. And we're going to add some stuff here. We're going to add a light for one. You can move this light anywhere you want it. You can adjust the color. By default, it's neutral white. Strength, you can have that as high as you want. The higher the number, the more bloom you're going to have. And what that is it's going to make like a cloud around the bright areas. They call that bloom. Like if I type in 1,000, you'll notice that this red is blurred all the way out in the scene here. Let me turn the background to pitch black. See it better. So it makes this red glare. And so everything you see in this red box here, this dotted line, is what you're going to see in the finished output. When you make a movie, you go into all these settings and tell it you want to make a movie. And for Facebook, they're very particular. It's got to be in the FFmpeg format. You got to set your encoding to not Matryoshka, but MP4. And I usually like to change this from medium quality to high quality. And it does have to have an audio channel, whether you got something to go with it or not. So you have to click this, and it's AAC. Very important. And of course, if you want the sound to be better, if you got a recording, you can type 320, and that is the highest quality for MP3 sound. I don't usually mess with any of those numbers. This is where you keyframe volume, though. If you just want it to start low and then finish high, or start high and finish low. Anyway, so I'm coming back over here to the light. Tinker with that a little bit. So it's neutral white. You can have blue light, aqua. You can have any of these. Just click and drag in that color wheel. Of course, I'll push play as I'm working with this. Let's see what we got there. This one beef I have about Blender, you can't animate too much of this color wheel. Now you can, let's see here. This is what you can do. You can keyframe color in a way, but you can't like animate the curve of what I'm doing here in this wheel, though I wish you could, but there ain't a way just yet. So I guess you pick one, and then you keyframe it. And here to frame 80, and you can pick a different color. And I'm thinking it would just make a straight line, though it wouldn't curve. It would just go from this point of aqua down here to, say, if I picked orange. Be something like that. We'll have it shift to different. Let's say the last frame we'll finish up on is red. Keyframe that. Push play and we can watch it. of course you can adjust the size of the light. Of course, the bigger the light, I guess the less distributed it is, but anyway. Change the type. That's sun, spotlight, and area, which means it's like a office fluorescent light or something like that. You can adjust the size of that as well. So those are your different controls. And you can keyframe most of these sliders. Anything that's usually got this dot after it. You even sometimes animate these little check boxes by pushing the I, letter I on your keyboard. I guess that means insert keyframe. But there you go. Now there probably is another way to animate this lattice box that we created. As a matter of fact, let me check something. I guess you do it with shape keys. I think I figured out. I'm gonna have to make another video on that one because I'd have to start over. I do want to save what we got here because this is, quite frankly, good enough. Because this does the job. It starts with the petals all closed, and they open up. Even if we did have to invert this lattice, I guess that's just what you have to do. It's kind of unique. You're seeing a first here. Even I didn't know. I looked up one video on how to use a lattice, but kind of went on my own after about the first few minutes. So I was toying with just a cube, and I thought I had this rose I found online and was wondering if there's a way I could open it and close it. And so, and let's just go back and play with this rose here a little bit more. I'm going to get rid of the light or reset it. I have to get back into object mode to do that. Select it. And if you want to delete your keyframes, we just clear them. I'll go back to neutral white here. This back to 90 watts. Select it back to point and select that back to a small lamp size. Want to tinker more with the of course you can change the actual color of the rose. You can have a white. This is how you can have even more control. When we was controlling the lamp, the color of the rose was already red, so you was kind of getting a mix when you was using these other colors. And so in order for that lamp to have total control, it'd have to be achromatic white, or the center right here. So that would be a white rose right there. That'd be how you do that. And I made the stem. The stem is not perfect. It's more or less, I found this rose petal set online. I think it was a free model or something that you get. you import it into Blender. I think it was an STL file. And basically just added the stem later. And joined it to this mesh. So in all this, this is one object where it's highlighted in orange. So like if I unselect everything, but if I select the rows, either the stem, all this is seen as one object. It means I can move it, the whole thing around. It's seen as one mesh. All that. We can tell it the material. We want to make sure that we're messing with the white. We don't want to control the color of the stem. We don't want to change that. So we'll just leave that green like it was. We want to only mess with the petals. So in this mesh there are two materials. And if I was organized, I would give it a name. So we'll say this is the flower petals. And rename this stem. So, like so. So anyway, that's just a little organizing thing there. We're going to see if we can make a clear kind of rose here. See what we can do here. Turn on screen space, refract. I think that, let's see, what is it? It's either reflections or refraction. Refraction, yeah. Yeah, that's what we want. Now, of course, Blender has two major different rendering engines built in. We've got, of course, Eevee, that's what I'm in, and way slower on this computer, unfortunately, it cycles, but it does process light more accurately if you got a good graphics card, but don't have that. So you may have noticed when I switched it that it kind of looked a little bit different. Light went through the petals further, a little bit more accurate, the light bouncing. It's a topic for another day, but anyway. Don't quite have a clear rose just yet. Why is that? Well, we've got high roughness. Let's turn the roughness down. The metallic, turn that down. Could also turn on alpha blend. I'm just experimenting at this point. Let's see what we got. Unfortunately, now that just looks like crap. Unless you're looking at it at the right angle. But let's see what the difference between Eevee and Cycles is on this one. So I'm in Eevee. Eevee's good for low-end computers. So I'm going to switch it to Cycles here. And you'll notice that it is trying to process the light bouncing inside of that clear. So we actually do technically have a clear. We've got all the right settings. We just need a more powerful graphics card. It's only done 32 steps there. Gotta see, change that up to 128. I might have to use some crazy numbers. So now it's processing. And this is what they call ray tracing. If you've ever heard that, that's what's going on. It's calculating the light bounces to the camera. It does it in steps. This is what takes time. It takes a long time. Say if we was wanting to make a movie that's got thousands of frames, we're still waiting on one. And that's why in the animation industry, this stuff can take months, even years to render. Especially when we're talking about cycles. And you'll notice that once we got, so it's finished, it's done all 128. It could be better, so we'll go even higher, 256. Picks up right where it leaves off. As long as I don't move the camera, I could keep this on until it, so we'll eventually fill in every, it looks kind of like static at the moment. But yeah, this is why I would love cycles, but the problem is it takes forever to process a bunch of frames. Like, say this timeline is 250, that's only 10 seconds of video, usually, if you're at 24 frames a second. So we're going to switch it back to Eevee, and that's about as good as it gets. Unfortunately. I'm trying to see, usually the best courses are like a workaround. As to see in the preview, it shows a sphere and it shows that it's clear. It's just not processing the light bouncing from that lamp that we put inside. Now, what if on the other side of the token, what if we duplicate it? What if we tried a different method? I want to get rid of the light. Or move it aside, we might use it later. But, go to wireframe. What if I duplicated Shift D? And have our object have its own materials. Got to go to Relations, make single user materials. Now, what if I told it to emit light at high strength? And then come back to the other rows. So we got like a rose inside of a rose. And change the base color. And say up the roughness. Not seeming to work at the moment. But we're just messing around here. Oh, interesting. I see more red when I turn transmission off. One of it, I think it's interesting. Really much pretty effects, I don't think. So anyway, forget that. Get rid of that. Come back to what we had before and we'll just mess with the basics here. I was going off on a tangent, trying to create the perfect clear rose inside of Eevee, and it seemed to have been impossible there, but those are the limits so far. So you can have it be kind of translucent then at best. And That's about as good as it might get. Something like that. Darker. I add another lamp. I'm going to get rid of all these gadgets here, and let's so something like that. It's a desirable effect. Looks kind of cool. So, how would you do this to a group of roses? Well, I think you'd have to parent the lattice to each of these roses. And well, let's just see if we can do that. So we got it working on one. Can we do this to, how would we have a bunch of these doing this? And we're going to see. I'll go back into solid view. Turn on my gizmos here so I can see what I'm doing. I would think you would have to duplicate the lattice as well. So we'll highlight the lattice and shift and right click the rows just so we got them both selected, and shift D and move it. So shift D to duplicate, enter, and we could drag it in either, this is green is Y, blue is Z, and red is X axis. I think I accidentally moved the wrong axis, but I meant to kind of, bring it out in front and bring it closer. Move that red arrow. There we go. Okay, so now we got more than one. Now, the problem you're going to have, they're going to all inherit the same color. And if you want the roses to be different colors, or have different shades instead of all being identical, I'll show you how to do that here in a little bit. So I have to add some more lights because right now this first one right here has got all the attention. So I'm going to get out of camera view and add some more lamps. We're going to add a bunch of them to light this scene up. Don't know why it flipped on me there, but that can happen. Yeah. Just make one lamp do 800 watts. How about that one? That might be too high. 400. Yeah, 100. Yeah. Yeah, that looks better. We need some light on this side, so we'll Shift D, duplicate, and press enter and move these arrows. Go back to the camera. Push spacebar to play it. You'll notice they'll all open up, so they all doing the same thing. Well, what if we wanted them to spin? Well, let's see. I'm not really sure, but we're going to select both items here. The rose and its close nearby lattice. And you see this little circle? When I push Shift and S, or that means snap, I want my cursor to be to the selected, and that's going to be in that circle that we saw earlier. And I'm going to insert something new called an empty. Just an empty plain axis. And we're going to parent the rose. Not sure. Now the orange, the bright orange, means which one's the default, and it does matter which one is which. We're going to try to make the rose parented to the lattice. And make sure that the empty is the main one. And then push Control P to parent to the object. Now, let's see. Don't know if I done this right. We'll see. Unselect everything, and if I did everything right, when I move this empty, the rose should rotate. So we'll see. We'll rotate the empty and see. And yep, it moves the stem and everything. Alright, that's good. So we should have where it will open up and it'll rotate the entire rose. And we can keyframe this as well, the rotation. I'll show you how to do that. This timeline here is now empty because we're now talking about just this selected item, and that's the empty. So it's been linked. We've linked the lattice and the object to the empty. I'm going to insert or push I, and we're going to jot down its rotation. So it made a little diamond there. We're again going to come to frame 100. And we're going to tell this, hey, we want to rotate this rose several times. So we want to click the blue axis and rotate several times. We want to make like a 400-degree spin or something like that. You just stop anywhere and push I. And you can either push A after you've done made your first, or you can just jot down location again for the rotation. Alright, go back to frame 1 and play it, and yeah, wow, there. If we wanted to slow it down, we'd just use fewer rotations. We would, we'll just push X and get rid of our keyframes. We'll start all over. Okay, push I and R, and then frame 100. Rotate along the Z. We're just going to make it rotate once then. I and R. We'll give that a try and see if it don't look as crazy there on that one. Yeah, it's a little bit better. Go back to... Okay, so now back to the coloring. What if I wanted the rose to be a different color? Well, you would select the rose that you're wanting to be a certain other color, because right now, let me show you what I'm talking about. If I just click on a different color, they all three of these, even the ones that aren't selected, are going to change because they all inherited the same material. So, put this back to about what it was, and with the one selected, we have to go to Object and Relations and Make Single User, and then Materials. This means that this object can now have its own, it's copied its own materials. It's now separate. So now we can colorize just the one that is selected. And if you want more advanced coloring, though, like a real rose would have little stripes, little variations. You could maybe use a noise generator or some kind of. Could try playing with that another day. It's usually best to pause the animation when you're tweaking these settings to see how it's going to look in the final render. And I'll show you that process some other time, but that's where you make a movie or something. So actually right now we're just setting things up. But nonetheless, this is how you would do it. Well, like you could use a magic texture and it's going to give it like a rainbow effect. Just call it magic texture, and you have some limited settings. You got scale and distortion. Just got some quick settings there. You can change its vector, like reflection would be like as we move our camera, the colors kind of move the pattern. Like if I set it to just generated, I think like it was before, colors just sort of stay frozen to the paddle. So that's a preference thing. I'm going to leave it on reflection there. So you got magic texture. Here's that noise texture. And you might want to use that as a let's see. So anyway, we're getting into more like a sci-fi rose at this point. But again, yes, it would do all the same things that you would expect it. Well, this has been a brief, not a complete how to do everything, but this is how you would do with a rose in Blender.